My name is Renee. I'm 33, and my husband once told me his office was like family. He'd come home late, smiling at his phone, saying they're my work family. But when a management position opened up, I applied quietly. And on Monday morning, his so-called work daughter walked into my office for approval. He couldn't even look up. Before I tell you how that day changed everything, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened next will make you question what family really means. I want you to understand something before I begin. I wasn't always this person. The woman who could walk into a room and shift the entire atmosphere with just her presence. The woman who could smile while her heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces and still make strategic decisions that would alter the course of multiple lives. No, I used to be softer, more trusting. I used to believe that love meant something, that marriage vows weren't just pretty words spoken in front of witnesses who'd probably forget them before the reception ended. I used to believe my husband when he looked into my eyes and told me I was his everything. 8 years. That's how long Grayson and I had been married when everything fell apart. Or maybe I should say, that's how long it took for me to finally see what had been falling apart all along, piece by piece, so gradually that I didn't notice the foundation crumbling beneath my feet. We met in our mid-20s, both of us ambitious, both of us hungry for success and connection. He was charming in that effortless way that some men are. The kind of charm that doesn't feel rehearsed or manipulative, at least not at first. Witty without being cruel, attentive without being suffocating, successful without being arrogant, or so I thought. The first few years were good, better than good actually. We built a life together. We bought a house with a backyard we swore we'd fill with children someday. We talked about our dreams late into the night, his head on my shoulder, my fingers running through his hair. He'd tell me about his goals at work, about climbing the corporate ladder, and I'd share my own ambitions. Back then, we were partners. Back then, when he said we, I believed he meant it. But something shifted around year 5. It was subtle at first. He started talking about his coworkers more. Not just in passing. Not just the usual complaints about annoying managers or boring meetings, but with this affection that made me pause. He'd come home and tell me stories about their inside jokes, about their lunch outings, about how connected they all were. My second family, he'd call them, laughing as he loosened his tie and headed to the kitchen for a beer. At first, I thought it was nice, healthy even. A man who enjoys his work, who has good relationships with his colleagues. What was wrong with that? But then the late nights started. Not every night, just enough to notice. Just enough that our dinner table, which used to have 2 place settings, started to only need 1 most evenings. He'd text me around 6, right when I was starting to cook, with some variation of the same message. Working late, don't wait up, team deadline, big project, you know how it is. And I did know, or I thought I did, because I had my own career, my own deadlines, my own understanding of professional responsibility. So I'd eat alone, save him a plate, and wait up anyway because that's what you do when you love someone. The texting thing bothered me more than I wanted to admit. He'd be sitting right next to me on the couch, our supposed quality time together, and his phone would light up, over and over. Buzz, buzz, buzz. And he'd smile at it. This small, private smile that used to be reserved for me. When I'd glance over, trying not to be obvious, trying not to be that wife, I'd catch glimpses of names I didn't recognize. Harper. That name appeared a lot. Along with emojis that seemed too casual, too familiar for professional communication. Harper was his work daughter, he explained when I finally asked. Just a young colleague, mid-20s, eager to learn, looks up to me like a mentor. He said it so casually, so dismissively, like I was being ridiculous for even questioning it. The phrase made my skin crawl even then, though I couldn't articulate why. Work daughter. What does that even mean? You don't get to create pseudo-familial relationships with people you're not related to, especially not young women in subordinate positions, and especially not when you have a wife at home who's starting to feel like a stranger in her own marriage. But I swallowed my discomfort. I smiled and nodded and told myself I was being insecure. Professional relationships are important, I'd think as I watched him type away, barely suppressing a laugh at whatever Harper or someone else had said in their team chat. You're being paranoid. He loves you. He married you. Stop being so needy. Except I wasn't needy. I was lonely. There's a difference, and it took me months to understand it. I'd lie in bed next to him, listening to him breathe, watching the blue light from his phone illuminate his face as he scrolled through messages at midnight, and I'd feel completely alone. When I tried to talk to him about it, tried to express that I missed him, that I felt disconnected, he'd sigh in that way that made me feel small. You wouldn't understand office culture, he'd say, and those words, God, those words cut deeper than any insult. Like I was some naive housewife who didn't have her own career, her own education, her own intelligence. Like my feelings were invalid because I didn't work in his specific office with his specific work family. The weekends were supposed to be ours. That was the unspoken agreement, the compensation for all those late nights and distracted evenings. But then those started disappearing too. Strategy sessions, he called them. Weekend planning meetings. Team building exercises. Always with apologies. Always with promises that it would slow down soon. That this was just a busy season. That I was still his priority. But priorities aren't just declared, they're demonstrated, and every action was demonstrating that I was sliding further and further down his list. I started noticing other things. Small things that individually meant nothing but together painted a picture I didn't want to see. The way he'd shower as soon as he got home from these long days, even before saying hello properly. The unfamiliar perfume scent that would cling to his shirts, something floral and young that definitely wasn't my signature scent. The way he'd angle his phone away from me, protective, secretive. The credit card statements showing lunches at nice restaurants on days he'd told me he was too busy to even grab food. I'm not stupid. I want to make that clear. I have a master's degree in operations management. I spent years working my way up in corporate environments, analyzing systems, identifying inefficiencies, solving complex problems. I know how to read data, how to spot patterns, how to trust my instincts when something doesn't add up. And nothing about Grayson's behavior was adding up anymore. But knowledge and action are two different things, aren't they? Because even as I saw the signs, even as my gut twisted with certainty that something was very wrong, I didn't confront him. Not really. I'd make small comments that he'd bat away with ease. I'd ask pointed questions that he'd deflect with charm. I'd go quiet, hoping he'd notice my pain. But he'd just fill the silence with more stories about his wonderful coworkers, his work family, his blessed work daughter, who apparently needed so much mentoring that it required late nights and weekends and constant text conversations. The anger started as an ember, deep in my chest. Small and contained, something I could almost ignore. I'd feel it flare up when he'd cancel our plans last minute, or when I'd see him laughing at his phone while barely acknowledging my presence, or when he'd come home smelling like someone else's perfume and look me in the eye and ask what's for dinner like nothing was wrong. But I'd push it down, smother it, tell myself that anger was useless, that I needed to be rational, that maybe I was overreacting. The pain, though, the pain was harder to control. It would hit me at random moments. I'd be driving to work and a song would come on, something that used to be ours, and I'd have to pull over because I couldn't see through the tears. I'd be in the shower and suddenly I'd be sobbing. My hand pressed against my mouth to muffle the sound because I didn't want him to hear, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he was breaking me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach for him, seeking comfort, seeking connection, and he'd be turned away from me, and that small rejection would feel like a canyon opening up in our bed. I lost weight. Not intentionally, just because food stopped tasting like anything and cooking for one person when you used to cook for two is a special kind of depressing. My friends started asking if I was okay. My mother, who's never been one to pry, actually sat me down and asked if everything was all right in my marriage. And I lied to all of them. Of course everything's fine. We're just busy with work, you know how it is. The same lies Grayson told me, now coming out of my own mouth, and I hated myself for it. Then I heard about the opening. Operations manager position at Grayson's company. A friend of a friend mentioned it in passing at a networking event I dragged myself to because staying home was becoming unbearable. It was a step up from my current position, significant salary increase, managing a whole department, the kind of opportunity I'd been preparing for my entire career. And it was at his company. The idea came to me all at once, crystal clear, like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. I could apply. I was more than qualified, probably overqualified if I'm being honest. I had the education, the experience, the track record of success. And because I'd kept my maiden name on all my professional documents, on my resume, on my LinkedIn, no one would immediately connect me to Grayson Reed. I'd just be Renee Alden, accomplished operations professional, perfect candidate for the role. I went home that night and opened my laptop before I could talk myself out of it. My hands were shaking as I updated my resume, as I crafted my cover letter, as I filled out the online application. Part of me felt insane. What was I doing? Was this revenge? Was this self-preservation? Was this just a way to see for myself what was really happening in that office he talked about so much but never actually let me into? Maybe it was all of those things. I hit submit at 2 in the morning, Grayson snoring beside me, completely unaware that I'd just set something in motion that would change everything. The anger in my chest was burning hotter now, fueled by determination, by the need to know, by the refusal to be a passive victim in my own story. If he wanted to keep me separate from his work life, if he wanted to maintain this artificial boundary between his work family and his actual family, fine. I'd cross that boundary myself. The response came faster than I expected. A week later, I had a phone screening. 2 weeks after that, a panel interview. They loved me. I could tell by the way they leaned forward when I spoke, by the questions they asked about when I could start, rather than if I was interested. They were impressed by my credentials, my ideas, my vision for streamlining their operations. I was exactly what they needed, and they knew it. Grayson had no idea. Through all of it, the applications, the interviews, the negotiation of my salary and benefits, he was completely oblivious. He'd ask me about my day in that distracted way he had, barely listening to my vague responses about meetings and projects. If he'd actually paid attention, if he'd actually asked follow-up questions, maybe he would have noticed the new energy in my voice, the way I was suddenly very interested in the structure of his company, the names of the executives. But he didn't ask, because he didn't really want to know. He just wanted to check the box of being an attentive husband before going back to his phone, back to his work family, back to Harper. The job offer came through on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage, having just left my current office, when the call came. The HR director congratulated me warmly, told me they were thrilled to have me join the team, asked when I could start. I negotiated for 3 weeks to give my current employer proper notice, and also because I needed time to prepare myself for what was coming. I didn't tell Grayson, not that night, not that week, not at all. I maintained the same routine, the same pattern of our increasingly hollow marriage. I listened to him talk about his day, about his team, about Harper, who apparently was working on some big project that required so much of his guidance. I smiled and nodded and asked the right questions, while inside I was counting down the days until everything would shift. The pain during those weeks was almost unbearable, because I knew I was about to blow up our life as we knew it. I knew that walking into that office would force truths into the light that had been festering in the dark. And part of me, a smaller part than I wanted to admit, still hoped I was wrong. Still hoped that I'd get there and find out he really was just dedicated to his job. That Harper really was just a mentee. That my suspicions were the product of an overactive imagination and too much time alone. But I knew better. Deep down, beneath the hope and the denial and the fear, I knew. I resigned from my current position with grace, thanking my managers for the opportunities, promising to stay in touch. My colleagues threw me a small going-away party, and I accepted their well wishes while keeping my next move vague. A new opportunity, I'd say. Time for a change. They didn't need to know more than that. The night before my first day, I barely slept. Grayson did, of course, undisturbed and peaceful beside me while I stared at the ceiling and played out 1,000 scenarios in my mind. What would his face look like when he saw me? Would he be angry? Scared? Ashamed? Would Harper be there? What would I say? How would I maintain my composure when everything in me wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers to questions I'd been swallowing for months? I got up early, before dawn, and took my time getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly, tailored and professional. Heels that made me feel powerful, that added 3 inches to my height. Minimal jewelry, just my wedding ring because not wearing it would reveal too much too soon. Hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Makeup immaculate, with special attention to my eyes because I needed them to look strong, not sad, not hurt, not vulnerable. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I recognized the woman staring back at me. Not the lonely wife who ate dinner alone and cried in the shower. Not the anxious woman who checked her husband's phone like a detective. But Renee Alden, operations manager, accomplished professional woman who took no nonsense from anyone. Grayson was still asleep when I left the house. I didn't wake him, didn't leave a note, just grabbed my bag and walked out the door of our house wondering if anything would ever be the same when I came back. The office building was impressive, all glass and steel and corporate prestige. I'd been here for my interviews, but arriving as an employee felt different, more real, more permanent. I checked in at security, got my badge, and took the elevator to the 7th floor where the operations department was located. My department now. The HR director met me in the lobby, all smiles and enthusiasm, ready to show me to my office and introduce me to the team. My office. It felt surreal, walking down those corridors, passing cubicles and conference rooms, knowing that somewhere in this building, Grayson was probably settling into his own desk, completely unaware of what was coming. My office was corner-positioned with windows overlooking the city. There was my name on the door, Renee Alden, Operations Manager. I ran my fingers over the nameplate and felt something settle in my chest. This was mine. I'd earned this. Whatever happened next, whatever fallout came from the collision of my professional and personal lives, I deserved to be here. The morning was a blur of orientation activities. Systems to learn, passwords to set up, policies to review. I was introduced to my team members, about 15 people who would report directly to me, though I was told not everyone was in yet. Some were at off-site meetings, some working from home, some arriving later. I shook hands and smiled and made mental notes about dynamics and hierarchies and who seemed genuinely welcoming versus who seemed wary of the new boss. And then, around 10:30, there was a knock on my doorframe. I looked up from the employee handbook I'd been reviewing, and there he was. Grayson. The color drained from his face so fast, I actually worried he might faint right there in my doorway. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. His eyes went wide, then wider, darting from me to the nameplate on my door, to the papers on my desk, and back to me like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. I felt a rush of emotions so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. Anger, hot and righteous. Pain, sharp and cutting. Satisfaction, dark and powerful. Fear, because this was real now, there was no going back. But above all, a strange sense of calm. I'd imagined this moment for weeks, and now that it was here, I knew exactly what to do. I smiled, not warmly, but professionally. The smile I'd give any colleague who appeared at my door. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "Can I help you?" He just stared at me. I watched him struggle, watched him try to process what was happening. I could see the questions racing through his mind. When did this happen? How did I not know? Why didn't she tell me? What does this mean? I let him stand there in silence. Let him feel uncomfortable, off balance, caught completely off guard, the way I'd felt every time he came home late smelling like perfume. Every time he chose his phone over me. Every time he made me feel like I was crazy for having perfectly reasonable concerns. Finally, he managed to speak. Renee, what are you doing here? I work here, I replied simply. I started today, operations manager. Didn't you see the company-wide email about my hiring? I had, in fact, made sure that email went out the previous week. A standard announcement welcoming the new operations manager, complete with my professional headshot and background. He must have seen it, must have scrolled right past it, probably while sitting across from me at our dinner table, not recognizing his own wife because he never really looked at me anymore. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another figure appeared behind him. A young woman. Mid-20s, like he'd said. Blonde, pretty in that fresh-faced way that made me feel every one of my 33 years. She was smiling as she approached, holding a tablet, clearly coming to see the new manager, clearly not expecting what she was about to find. Harper. I knew it was her before anyone said her name. I'd seen exactly one photo from a company event that Grayson had shown me months ago, pointing out his team. But I recognized her instantly. The way you recognize someone who's been haunting the edges of your marriage like a ghost. Her smile faltered when she saw Grayson frozen in the doorway. It disappeared completely when she looked past him and saw me sitting behind the desk. The air in that office went absolutely frigid. I could feel it, this terrible tension crackling between the three of us. Grayson still couldn't seem to form words. Harper looked confused, then nervous, her eyes bouncing between us like she was trying to figure out what was happening. I stood up, took my time doing it, smoothing my suit jacket, straightening my shoulders. I walked around my desk and extended my hand to Harper. You must be Harper, I said pleasantly. I'm Renee Alden, the new operations manager. I've been looking forward to meeting the team. She shook my hand automatically, her grip weak and uncertain. Nice to meet you, she managed, but her eyes kept sliding to Grayson, looking for guidance, looking for explanation. I understand you've been working on the Coleman project, I continued, as if this was just a normal professional interaction. I'd like to schedule some time to review your progress and discuss the strategic direction moving forward. Does this afternoon work for you? I could see her struggling, trying to understand the dynamic, trying to figure out if she was in trouble, trying to catch Grayson's eye. But Grayson was staring at the floor now, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Sure, Harper said finally. This afternoon is fine. Excellent. Let's say 2 o'clock. I gave her my most professional smile, the one that didn't reach my eyes. You can bring Grayson if his input would be valuable, since I understand you two work closely together. The emphasis on closely was subtle, but it landed. I saw Harper flinch slightly, saw Grayson's hands curl into fists at his sides. That won't be necessary, Harper said quickly. I can present the project myself. Perfect. I'll see you then. She left, practically fleeing down the hallway, and then it was just Grayson and me, facing each other in my office with the door still open, with people walking past who could hear if either of us raised our voice. He found his words finally, stepping into my office and lowering his voice to an angry whisper. What the hell is this, Renee? When were you planning to tell me you applied here? That you got hired here? I sat back down, taking my time, letting him stand there while I settled into my chair. The chair of authority, the chair of power. I wasn't aware I needed your permission to pursue career opportunities, I said calmly. This position opened up. I applied. I was selected. It's pretty straightforward. You know that's not what I mean. His voice was strained, stressed in a way I hadn't heard before. This is where I work. You can't just show up here without telling me. I tilted my head, studying him. Why not? You talk about this place constantly, about your work family. I thought it might be nice to finally be part of it. He had no response to that. What could he say? That he deliberately kept me separate from this part of his life? That he didn't want me here? That my presence threatened something he'd been carefully maintaining? We need to talk, he said finally. Tonight. At home. I have a lot of onboarding to complete today, I replied, turning my attention back to the papers on my desk. And I imagine I'll be working late, learning the systems. You understand how that is. First week in a new position is always demanding. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. How many times had he used that exact reasoning? Renee. At work. I interrupted, looking up at him with a cool expression I'd practiced in the mirror. You'll need to address me as Miss Alden. I'm your manager's manager, and I think maintaining professional boundaries is important, don't you? I watched him process that. Watched him realize that the power dynamic he'd been so comfortable with, where he had his separate domain that I couldn't touch, had just shifted completely. I was his superior now, not directly, but close enough that my authority superseded his in every way that mattered in this building. He left without another word, his shoulders rigid with anger or shock or fear. I couldn't tell which and didn't particularly care. I sat in my office after he left and let myself feel it, the satisfaction, cold and sharp, the vindication of watching his face drain of color. The power of being the one with information, with control, with the upper hand for the first time in months. But underneath that, the pain was still there, because seeing him, seeing Harper, seeing them in the same space and watching their silent communication, the way she looked to him for guidance like he was her anchor, it confirmed everything I'd suspected. The late nights weren't about work, the texts weren't mentorship, the work family he'd built wasn't professional networking. He'd been building a life here that didn't include me. Maybe not a physical affair, though I suspected that too, but certainly an emotional one. He'd been giving pieces of himself to Harper, to this office, to this version of himself that got to be charming and important and admired, while I got the leftovers. The exhausted husband who couldn't be bothered to have a real conversation. The distant partner who treated my concerns like annoyances. I spent that first day observing everything. Sitting in on meetings, reviewing workflows, studying the team dynamics. And I saw it all so clearly now that I was inside it. The way Grayson and Harper gravitated toward each other in the conference room. The way they shared knowing looks. The way other team members seemed aware of something between them, that elephant in the room that everyone politely ignored. I also saw inefficiencies, problems with documentation, unclear approval processes, accountability gaps that had allowed for all sorts of inappropriate behavior to flourish unchecked. This department needed serious restructuring, and lucky for them, that was exactly what I was hired to do. At 2 o'clock, Harper knocked on my door. She came in without Grayson, as promised, but she looked nervous. Her presentation on the Coleman project was competent but rushed, like she'd thrown it together in the last few hours. I asked pointed questions, professional ones, about timelines and deliverables and budget considerations. I gave her no indication of what I knew, what I suspected, what I felt. When we finished, I leaned back in my chair and studied her. She was young, I'd give her that. Probably didn't fully understand what she'd gotten herself into, or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, she was about to learn a valuable lesson about professional conduct. Harper, I said carefully, I want you to know that I take workplace ethics very seriously. Part of my mandate in this role is to ensure that all team members are operating with integrity, that relationships remain professional, and that there are clear boundaries. She paled slightly. I understand, Miss Alden. I'm going to be implementing some new protocols, regular team reviews, updated documentation requirements, clearer reporting structures. I trust that won't be a problem for anyone who's been doing their job appropriately. Of course not, she said quickly. That sounds very reasonable. I smiled. I'm glad we're on the same page. You can go. She practically ran out of my office. Over the next few days, I began my work in earnest. I requested access to company email servers, which was standard for my position. I started reviewing communications, looking for the patterns I knew I'd find, and there they were, like breadcrumbs leading me straight to the truth I'd already known but needed to confirm. Emails between Grayson and Harper that had nothing to do with work. Flirtatious messages with emojis that made my stomach turn. Planning for lunch meetings that weren't on any calendar. Inside jokes that spoke to hours of personal conversation. Messages sent at 10:11 at night, when he was supposedly working late but was clearly just messaging her while I sat at home alone. There was nothing explicitly sexual in the emails, they were both smart enough to avoid that, but the emotional intimacy was undeniable. The way he wrote to her, encouraging and warm and engaged, it was how he used to write to me years ago. The way she responded, seeking his approval, his attention, his validation, it was clear that whatever this relationship was, it had crossed every professional line that should have existed. I compiled it all. Screenshots, timestamps, patterns of communication. Not because I wanted to destroy him, though part of me did, but because I needed documentation. Because if I was going to dismantle this situation, I needed to do it the right way, through proper channels, with evidence that couldn't be disputed. I reached out to HR. Set up a confidential meeting with the director, the same woman who'd hired me. I presented my findings not as a scorned wife, but as a manager who discovered ethics violations during routine departmental review. I was calm, factual, professional. I laid out the evidence and explained my concerns about favoritism, about potential conflicts of interest, about the appearance of impropriety even if nothing physical had occurred. The HR director's face grew more serious with each piece of evidence I showed her. "This is troubling," she said finally. "We'll need to launch a formal investigation." "I understand," I replied. "I want to be clear that I'm bringing this forward in my capacity as operations manager because these issues impact team morale and departmental efficiency. However, I should disclose that Grayson Reed is my husband." Her eyes widened. She hadn't made the connection, hadn't put together that Renee Alden and Mrs. Grayson Reed were the same person. "I see," she said slowly. "That does complicate matters. Are you able to remain objective in this process?" "I've presented you with facts," I said evenly. "The evidence speaks for itself regardless of my personal relationship, but I understand if the company feels a third party should handle the investigation." She nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your transparency. We'll handle this appropriately. And Renee, I'm sorry. This can't be easy." It wasn't sympathy I wanted, but I accepted it with a nod. "I just want to ensure this department operates with integrity going forward." The investigation was quiet but thorough. HR interviewed team members, reviewed communications, examined patterns of behavior. I recused myself from any direct involvement, but I heard things through the grapevine. People were talking. The work family that Grayson had been so proud of was fracturing as everyone tried to protect themselves, distance themselves from the situation. Grayson tried to confront me at home that first night, but I shut it down. "I'm not discussing an active HR investigation," I told him coldly. "You'll have your chance to respond through the proper channels." He tried a different approach. "Renee, please, can we just talk as husband and wife? Forget the office stuff." I looked at him standing in our kitchen. This man I'd loved for 8 years. This man who'd made me feel crazy and paranoid and insufficient, and I felt nothing but contempt. "You want to talk as husband and wife? Fine. Why don't you tell me about all those late nights you were mentoring Harper? All those texts you couldn't be bothered to put down during our dinners? All those times you made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting my own husband's attention?" "It's not what you think," he started, and I actually laughed. A harsh, bitter sound that didn't resemble anything joyful. "You don't even know what I think, Grayson. You haven't known what I think or feel for months because you stopped asking. You stopped caring. You built yourself a whole separate life and called it work, and now you're upset that I've stepped into it? I never cheated on you," he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. "Nothing physical happened with Harper. We're just friends. Just friends don't text each other until midnight every night. Just friends don't make their spouse feel like an outsider. Just friends don't send emails about how much they appreciate each other's presence and how hard it is to be apart on weekends." He went pale. "You read my emails? I'm the operations manager. I have access to all company communications. And what I found was a pattern of inappropriate relationship that violated multiple company policies, regardless of whether anything physical occurred." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded broken. I never meant for this to happen, it just developed over time. She was easy to talk to, and things at home were strained, and I know that's not an excuse, but things at home were strained because you checked out of our marriage, I interrupted. You don't get to use your own neglect as justification for seeking emotional intimacy elsewhere. We stood there in silence, the wreckage of our marriage spread out between us like shattered glass. What happens now? He asked finally. Now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. At work, the investigation will conclude and recommendations will be made. At home, I need to figure out if there's anything left worth saving, though I think we both know the answer to that. I saw him flinch, saw the realization hit him that this wasn't something he could charm or explain his way out of. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that he had no leverage, no control, no way to minimize what he'd done. The investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, Grayson and I existed in our house like ghosts, barely speaking, sleeping in separate rooms. I went to work every day and did my job with absolute professionalism. I restructured workflows, implemented new accountability measures, earned praise from upper management for already improving departmental efficiency. No one could say I was letting personal matters impact my professional performance. Harper resigned before the investigation concluded. I heard she got a job at a competitor, probably figured it was better to leave on her own terms than wait for potential termination. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no anger, nothing. She was just a symptom of the real problem, which was that my husband had stopped valuing our marriage long before she came along. The investigation findings were delivered to Grayson privately, but the recommendations were clear. Official written warning for violation of professional conduct policies. Mandatory ethics training. 6-month probationary period during which any further violations would result in immediate termination. No promotion eligibility for 2 years. His career wasn't destroyed, but it was damaged. His reputation in the office went from golden boy with his work family to the guy who had an inappropriate relationship and got caught by his own wife. The humiliation of it ate at him, I could tell. The way people looked at him now, with judgment instead of admiration. Meanwhile, my star was rising. Upper management was impressed with how I'd handled a delicate situation with professionalism and integrity. 3 months into my tenure, I was called into a meeting with the VP of Operations. Renee, we've been incredibly pleased with your performance, she said. The culture shift in your department has been remarkable, and your leadership during a challenging situation showed real character. We'd like to offer you a promotion to regional manager, overseeing operations for all our East Coast offices. I accepted without hesitation. The promotion came with a significant raise, a corner office on the executive floor, and most importantly, complete professional separation from Grayson. I'd be in a different building managing a broader scope, far enough removed that no one could claim any conflict of interest. The day I moved into my new office, I saw Grayson in the parking garage. He was heading into the building as I was leaving, both of us in professional attire, both of us carrying briefcases like we were strangers who happened to work for the same company. Congratulations on the promotion, he said stiffly. Thank you, I replied with equal formality. Renee, I held up my hand. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We've both moved on professionally. I suggest we do the same personally. I handed him divorce papers that evening. He signed them without contest. What could he contest? He'd violated our marriage in every way that mattered, and we both knew it. The house went to me, along with most of our assets. He didn't fight it, probably knew better than to try after everything that had happened. 6 months later, the divorce was final. I sat in my lawyer's office, signed the final documents, and walked out feeling lighter than I had in years. The anger that had burned in my chest for so long had finally cooled into something manageable. The pain had scarred over, still tender if I pressed on it, but no longer bleeding. I threw myself into my new role with everything I had. Built a reputation as a fair but demanding leader, mentored young professionals, women especially, teaching them about boundaries and self-worth and never letting anyone make them feel small. Rose through the ranks until I was VP of National Operations, A title that 15-year-old me would have been proud of. That 25-year-old me would have thought impossible. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Grayson eventually left the company, couldn't handle working somewhere where everyone knew his story, where his mistakes were part of office lore. Last I heard, he'd moved to another city, started over somewhere fresh. I hoped he'd learn something from it all, but honestly, I didn't spend much time thinking about it. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Revenge doesn't always need fire and fury and dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply showing up as your best self, refusing to be diminished, taking up the space you deserve. Grayson thought he could keep me in a box, separate from his work life, uninformed and compliant. He thought his work family was something precious he needed to protect from me. But I was never the threat to his work family. He was. His choices, his boundary violations, his inability to maintain professional relationships appropriately, that's what destroyed the environment he claimed to value so much. I didn't destroy his career. I didn't sabotage him. I didn't even publicly shame him. I simply did my job with integrity, held people accountable to established policies, and refused to look the way when violations occurred just because they involved my husband. The pain of that period, of discovering the betrayal, of feeling so alone in my own marriage, it changed me. Made me harder in some ways, but stronger too. I don't trust as easily now. I don't ignore red flags or talk myself out of my own instincts. I don't make myself smaller to accommodate someone else's comfort. And I don't ever let anyone tell me I wouldn't understand something just because they don't want to explain their behavior. My life now is full in ways it wasn't during those last years of my marriage. I have friendships that sustain me, work that challenges me, hobbies I'd neglected while I was trying to save a relationship that one person can't save alone. I date sometimes, cautiously, with clear boundaries and immediate exit strategies if things don't feel right. Maybe I'll marry again someday, maybe I won't. Either way, I'll never again lose myself in someone else. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled it, if I wish I'd confronted him differently, or tried marriage counseling, or given him a chance to explain before involving HR. And my answer is always the same. No. I don't regret trusting my instincts, documenting what I found, and addressing workplace violations through appropriate channels. I don't regret protecting myself, my career, and my dignity. He called them his work family. But I was the only one who ever meant it, who understood what family really means. Loyalty, honesty, showing up even when it's hard. Protecting each other rather than seeking comfort in the arms of someone else. He threw away his real family for a pretend one, and by the time he realized what he'd lost, I'd already started building a life that didn't include him. That Monday morning when I walked into his office, when his work daughter showed up expecting approval and found me instead, when he couldn't even look up because he knew exactly what he'd done and exactly what it would cost him, that wasn't the moment everything changed. Everything had already changed. I just finally stopped pretending it hadn't. And you know what? I sleep better now than I have in years. My bed is mine alone, no one scrolling through texts at midnight beside me. No one making me feel like I'm competing for attention in my own marriage. I wake up and make coffee just the way I like it, strong and black, without having to accommodate anyone else's preferences. I make plans without wondering if they'll be canceled last minute. I invest in friendships without feeling guilty for having a life outside my marriage. I built myself back up from the woman who cried in the shower to the woman who walks into boardrooms and commands respect. Not because of bitterness or spite, but because I remembered who I was before I let someone else's neglect define me. So if you're watching this, if you're relating to any part of this story, if you've felt that pain of being second choice in your own relationship, if you've swallowed your instincts because someone told you that you were being paranoid or unreasonable or that you just wouldn't understand, I want you to hear this. Trust yourself. Your gut knows things your mind wants to deny. Those red flags you're ignoring? They're red for a reason. That pain you're minimizing? It matters. You matter. Your feelings are valid even if someone tells you they're not. And if you find yourself in a situation where betrayal has upended your life, remember that you have more power than you think. Not power to control someone else's choices, but power over your own response. Power to protect yourself. Power to pursue opportunities that elevate you. Power to refuse to be diminished by someone else's poor decisions. I didn't need to scream or throw things or make dramatic scenes. I just needed to show up as my most competent self, do my job with integrity, and let the consequences unfold naturally. His choices created the situation. I just refused to protect him from the outcomes. Some people might call that calculated, cold even. And maybe it was. But I'd spent months being warm and understanding and giving him the benefit of the doubt while he slowly dismantled our marriage. I'd spent countless nights making excuses for him, talking myself out of my own pain, trying to be the cool wife who didn't make a fuss about late nights and constant texting and emotional distance. Being warm hadn't saved my marriage. Being understanding hadn't made him value me. Being accommodating hadn't kept him from seeking connection elsewhere. So yes, I got calculated. I got strategic. I used every skill I developed in my professional life and applied them to my personal crisis. And I don't apologize for that. Because while he was busy building his work family and telling me I wouldn't understand office culture, I was busy understanding it better than he ever did. The look on his face that morning will stay with me forever. Not because I enjoy his pain. I'm not that person. But because it represented a shift I'd needed for so long. The shift from powerless to powerful. From kept in the dark to fully informed. From dismissed wife to respected manager. He'd spent so long controlling the narrative, controlling what I knew about his work life, controlling our interactions by being perpetually distracted and distant. And in one morning, all that control evaporated. Suddenly, I knew everything. I saw everything. I had access to everything he'd been hiding behind the wall of work. And what I found there wasn't worth what he'd sacrificed. A flirtation with a younger colleague. The ego boost of being admired. The thrill of something new and uncomplicated by the realities of marriage and mortgages and the hard work of maintaining intimacy over years. He traded our marriage for something ultimately meaningless, and that's what makes me saddest when I think about it now. Not angry anymore, just sad. Sad that he couldn't see the value of what he had until it was gone. Sad that he let himself become the kind of man who calls an inappropriate relationship mentorship. Sad that he made choices that hurt both of us when he could have just been honest, could have worked on our marriage, could have been the partner he'd promised to be. But that sadness doesn't consume me anymore. It's just a small ache, the way an old injury might hurt when the weather changes. A reminder of something that happened, something I survived, something that ultimately made me stronger even though I wouldn't have chosen it. I've learned that you can love someone and still walk away from them. That you can grieve a relationship while simultaneously feeling relief that it's over. That you can acknowledge the good years while refusing to ignore the bad ones. That you can wish someone well from a distance while having no desire to be part of their life. My story isn't special, and that's what makes it important. There are thousands of women, maybe hundreds of thousands, living some version of what I lived. Feeling that creeping suspicion, noticing the distance. Being told they're overreacting, slowly losing themselves while trying to hold together a relationship that one person has already left emotionally. If my story resonates with you, if you see pieces of your own life in mine, then I want you to know you're not alone. And more than that, I want you to know that you have options. You don't have to stay small. You don't have to accept crumbs of attention from someone who promised you the whole meal. You don't have to live with that knot of anxiety in your stomach, that voice in your head saying something's wrong even as everyone tells you you're being paranoid. And if you decide to act, if you decide to pursue your own power and your own truth, do it smart. Document everything, build your case, use proper channels. Don't let anyone dismiss you as an emotional, scorned woman. Be professional, be strategic, be unassailable in your integrity. Because that's what makes this kind of revenge so effective. It's not revenge at all, not really. It's just consequences. It's accountability. It's refusing to be complicit in your own dismissal. When people ask me if I'm bitter, I tell them, no. Bitterness is letting someone live rent-free in your head long after they've vacated your life. I'm not bitter, I'm clear. Clear about what I deserve, what I'll accept, what I'll never tolerate again. When they ask if I miss him, I tell them I miss who I thought he was. I miss the marriage I believed we had before I realized it was one-sided. But the real him, the man who could look me in the eye and lie, the man who made me feel crazy for having valid concerns, the man who valued his ego over our vows? No, I don't miss that man at all. Sometimes late at night, I think about that moment in my office doorway when our eyes met and he realized everything had changed. I think about Harper's face when she saw me behind that desk. I think about the careful way I maintained my composure, even though inside I was screaming, breaking, barely holding myself together. And I'm proud of that woman. The one who didn't fall apart even when she had every right to. The one who channeled her pain into action, her anger into strategy, her heartbreak into determination. She saved me, that version of myself. She showed up when I needed her most and refused to let me be destroyed by someone else's choices. So, this is what I want to leave you with. If you're in pain, if you're feeling that specific ache of being undervalued by someone who's supposed to treasure you, please know that your pain is real and valid and not something you have to just endure. You deserve better. You deserve to be chosen, to be valued, to be someone's priority and not their backup plan. And if the person who promised to be your partner has instead built a separate life that doesn't include you, if they've created their own version of a work family or friend family, or any other kind of family that pushes you to the margins of your own relationship, you have every right to step into that space and claim what's yours. Your dignity, your power, your future. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it's about showing up stronger than they expected. Sometimes it's about refusing to shrink yourself to accommodate their guilt. Sometimes it's about living well, succeeding boldly, and moving forward without looking back. I walked past Grayson's office on my last day before moving to the regional headquarters. He was packing up his things, shoulders heavy with the weight of his choices. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not hatred, not love, not even satisfaction. Just the cool indifference of complete detachment. I kept walking, kept moving forward, kept building the life I deserved, and I've never looked back. If you felt this story, if something in it resonated with your own experience or helped you see your situation more clearly, I'd love to hear from you. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, whether you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything, whether you've had to find your own strength in the face of betrayal. Because these stories matter. Your story matters. The way we survive our worst moments and build ourselves back stronger, that matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best revenge is becoming so completely whole on your own that you can walk past the person who broke you and feel absolutely nothing at all. That's freedom. That's peace. That's what I found on the other side of the worst period of my life. And if I can find it, so can you. Remember, silence and success speak louder than anyone's excuses ever could. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you write your own.